From the early days of television and Bishop Sheen to the today's show of Touched by an Angel, religion has had a place in prime time. The question is, how much of a place and how religious is it? These are questions that we'll be exploring on today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. Stay with us.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Richard Thompson of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, welcoming you to the program. Today we're going to be turning our attention to prime time religion. It was in 1994 that Touched by an Angel became a popular hit in the lineup. And since that time there have been a number of other programs that have dealt explicitly with religious themes. The question is, though, how religious are these and how good a television is it? And to help us with this, we are privileged to have Diane Holloway, who is the television critic for the Austin American-Statesman.
Hi.
And we're glad to have Dean Durston McDonald from the Episcopal Seminary of the Southwest. Mm-hmm. And I'm just eager to hear what you have to say about this. I mean, why all of a sudden there was Touched by an Angel, and then there was Soul Man, and Good News, and Nothing Sacred? How come all of a sudden?
Well, I don't think there's a big secret that religion sells. I mean, the top box office movie right now is City of Angels, which is about an angel. I think that television sort of follows any cultural trend that might have advertising bucks in it, and religion is something that's a part of everybody's lives. And I think there are people in Hollywood are just now realizing that it's a part of people's lives that they want to see on television. And anytime you can put a show on that people will watch, those are high ratings, and that's why the producers are making them.
Okay, it makes money.
It makes money, it sells.
But it's also in the water. That is, spirituality is a guaranteed success on almost any book. Look at the bestseller list.
That's right.
So there's something going culturally which says that there's a spiritual hunger, and then that can be packaged in all sorts of ways. And I think that's what's feeding into the commercial possibilities.
Okay.
Well, it also strikes me that the shows that are popular and the ventures that are popular do deal with spirituality in a real sort of feel-good general way, as opposed to specific religion, which can be very controversial and very disturbing to some people. Mm-hmm. So I think it's real interesting that the TV shows that have been successful have been about free-floating angels, and it's a decidedly Christian show, but it's not specific. It's not Baptist or Methodist or Catholic. It's real feel-good. Generic type religion.
Okay, you agree with that?
Yes, I do. In fact, once you start asking how good is the religion or how do you assess it,
yes,
then I think probably people of deep faith from a Jewish tradition or a Christian tradition or an Islamic tradition would start raising some serious questions about the portrayal of religion in television. It's sort of the Beaver family revisited from the 50s in religious guise. I mean, that's often, but that's what you expect in a popular medium.
Okay, what would it be if it were not a rerun of the Beaver family? Well,
I was struck knowing that I was going to be on the show, watching some recent broadcasts, and not long ago, the Seventh Heaven did a significantly profound series, or not series, but a show in which they dealt with the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And with the Holocaust, they had two subplots in the family going, which involved people saying they hated somebody else and then trying to make it all right. And in one case, it's resolved, and in another case, at the end of the show, it's unresolved and it can't be fixed. Now, that's more deeply religious, as was the treatment of the Holocaust, in a way that's even unusual for that show.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think it's very out of character for that show. Yeah. I haven't seen a lot of episodes of it, but it strikes me as being sort of Father Knows Best more than a show about a specific spiritual situation or religious subject matter. It's really more of a family drama that has a religious overtone or a theme or almost a gimmick.
I mean, you've got the father there who is a minister, but very non-denominational.
Exactly.
Kind of generic Protestant, I guess
Right.
you'd say. And the interaction usually brings in religion somewhere along the way, but otherwise it's about their family relations and problems at school and with the kids and this sort of thing.
I'm glad to hear that they did the one on the Holocaust, because that shows that it can be done.
Right, shows the potential.
Yeah, it shows it can be done.
The contrast between that and Soul Man for me was stunning, because Soul Man's a situation comedy about a single parent, and the fact that it's a clergy person is really irrelevant, and it's just window dressing. And my sense of the way clergy are portrayed on that is to say, oh, shucks, they're human.
Right.
And then to laugh at the foibles. But there's no dealing with the anguish that's built into that role or the tough questions
No,
of faith.
and in fact, one thing that struck me on one of the Soul Man episodes that I saw was that it's almost like they're presenting these priests as real people, that we're supposed to see them that way for the first time, and it's supposed to be somehow funny and gimmicky, like seeing a monkey dressed up in the zoo. And I think people out in Hollywood sometimes don't realize that a lot of people go to church, and it's a part of our lives every week, and it's not, these people are real to us. They're not unusual. They're real people, and so it's not particularly shocking to have one, say darn and stomp their foot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean...
Or more.
Or more, right.
That's not news, is it?
No.
But, I mean, here you got Dan Aykroyd playing this Episcopal priest, of all things, from Saturday Night Live. And that says a lot, it seems to me. I know one critic says, we chose the Episcopal Church on purpose. And why exactly? I know. I remember he said, because, well, that can show him, Episcopals will take a drink now and again. And that shows that he's human and kind of sets it up from that standpoint. But still, my feeling is that that's really a gimmicky show.
I think so.
I mean, the fact that he's a clergyman, he just uses
It's
it as kind of a joke.
Yeah.
Well, it's a costume. Yeah, it's a
That's
costume to have it. And then I guess also the network can say, sure, we have shows about religion on our primetime lineup. Here's one right here. ABC can stand back and say, look, we had a show about religion, and don't criticize us.
Yeah. Well, I also had seen this quote in the New York Times. I wanted to get your feedback on. This was Jack Miles, who was writing this feature on primetime religion. God on primetime TV is like God in American culture, submerged most of the time, emerging only as a guest star whose appearance is rarely announced. You agree with that?
Well, all the shows we were working for, the answer would be yes. In Touched by an Angel, you're likely to get the tagline at the end, God loves you. I mean, there'll be some mention of God, but there's really no working of God in the program. It's the angels who are at work. And they're clearly human projections and human-like figures. And in the other shows, there are no questions about God and God's role in that situation. It's all the human dimension, which is important. But there's no real question about what is God up to in this situation and what is God up to in the world these days. You,
what's your feeling about this?
I would agree. I think that it's interesting to me that that the people who put the shows on, the network programmers and the producers and the writers, somehow see this as an exotic topic, that it's not a day-to-day topic, like a family dealing with school problems or a family dealing with whatever economic problems, that it's somehow seen as exotic and different and unusual and not part of their everyday experience. So they're writing it from a fiction standpoint as opposed to writing it from a reality-based standpoint.
For me, the contrast, and it may be the difference in the media, is the contrast between television and a Hollywood success like The Apostle. A film where an evangelical preacher is portrayed from the inside and sympathetically. And he's not my theology. but where in the film a genuine conversion occurs, in spite of what everybody in the audience would think, where you know the audience is skeptical about all that, and it's serious and it's credible at the same time that that character, the minister, is a flawed character. In fact, is up on the lam for murder.
And it's not a happy ending.
And it's not a happy ending. That's just unusual. That's unusual for Hollywood, but I think it shows the potential of the media, and I think television has that same potential.
Well, you keep talking about the network folks and the producers and the folks who are in the power positions to come up with these programs and their presuppositions. And I think that one of the assumptions that I make is that they are going to really steer away from what is truly controversial. In other words, you talked about Seventh Heaven dealing with the Holocaust and some issues like that. But I mean, the Ellen experience, where the Southern Baptist Church came in to protest the coming out of homosexually speaking.
But I think this is where you and I may disagree. I think that they're more than happy to put on controversial subjects as long as people are watching. I mean, they were thrilled with the fact that, you know, millions and millions of people watched the coming out episode.
Yeah.
What happened after that was that the show got unfunny. No one was watching it because it wasn't funny anymore. And it wasn't unusual anymore. She had come out and there she was. But I think that the network did tackle controversial religious topics in Nothing Sacred, which was a show about a Catholic priest who was wrestling with all kinds of things. And that show dealt with abortion. It dealt with the vow of chastity. It dealt with a number of very controversial topics.
And it's not on the air anymore.
And it's been canceled, but not because the network took it off because they didn't like it. They took it off because it had low ratings. And I really don't think the protests from the Catholic lead had much to do with it. I really think if that show, with all its protests, had been a top 20 show, it would still be on.
But I have a hunch about that. I would think that the low ratings might be because those were very serious topics that are very divisive, and they hit a little bit too close to home, and people didn't want to watch that, and so they dropped away. I'm struck with the contrast of All in the Family and how really touchy questions of racial discrimination and all sorts of bias and bigotry were able to be handled because it was done through humor. And that may be what we need as human beings, is on very serious, heavy topics to be able to come at that through the humor.
Yeah, that may take more talent from writers than exists. I mean, how would you make a topic about abortion funny? You know, it's very difficult to tackle
you
that
can't
kind of thing.
recreate Archie Bunker, but before Archie Bunker, you would say, how could you make fun of racists?
Well,
okay,
but you
guess what? We will just take a little pause for station identification here, as it were. We're going to be coming back in just a minute, and we'll pick up with Archie Bunker right after that. How's that? You folks join us again in just a minute. Welcome back. We're on Austin Faith Dialogue today, a television show talking about television, talking about religion in prime time. And we are pleased to have Diane Holloway from the Austin American-Statesman, the television critic for the paper, and Dean Durston McDonald from the Episcopal Theological Seminary of the Southwest.
Yes.
And in the first half, we were looking at primarily the shows like Seventh Heaven and Soul Man and Touched by an Angel that are specifically religious by definition. Let's, for a minute, think about anything else on prime time that truly is religious in terms of spiritual and moral values. And I think you'd said you'd done some looking from that standpoint.
Yes, there's several series, that dramatic series that I watch and think real highly of, but are not specifically every week geared to religion. The example that comes to mind is NYPD Blue is one, and Homicide, Life on the Streets is another. Both very, very gritty police dramas. But there was a story arc 2 seasons ago, or maybe it was last season, I think it was 2 seasons ago, with the Andy Sipowicz character on NYPD Blue, this very tough, rough, tumble cop who's an alcoholic and uses bad language and all kinds of things. But his son was shot and killed. And several episodes dealt with him wrestling with his faith and wrestling with why God would let such a thing happen. And it was just very sensitively handled. I think a lot of people have felt that way before. When something bad happens to you or you lose somebody, you wonder why it was allowed to happen. Here was a perfectly wonderful person and shot down in the prime of his life. And it was very well handled. Another character that had a storyline like that was a Pemberton character on Homicide who had a stroke a couple seasons ago and wrestled with his faith, and his marriage nearly fell apart, and he came back to his faith. And it showed these characters wrestling with their spiritual demons and coming back to it in a realistic way, not with a light shining over their heads or something like that, but coming to grips and coming to a place of peace with help from their church. And that's the kind of thing that I think a lot of people like to see, because it's more of an everyday experience than seeing an angel come in the door.
I think that's right. I'd like to say that spirituality is not necessarily good.
Okay.
It is. That is, if you asked what gods are worshipped on religion, then it seems to me there's a religious dimension to lots of commercial television, which is worshiping the gods of success, worshiping the pursuit of money, worshiping the false god of my identity resides in my career, and also the false religious message that violence is the solution to human problems. Now, those are religious messages that are coming through the media very loud and clear. So the question is, what's the alternative to those idols? I'm speaking in the biblical tradition, and those gods. So the shows that raise questions about there has to be more to life than my career. And a lot of the narrative shows do that. To my mind, the best dramatic shows now have several stories going at once and leave them unresolved at the end of the episode. That is a more true picture of life and will fit with what all the world religions want to say about the depth and the ambiguity and the importance of life being beneath the surface rather than in what the culture says we should do.
Okay, well, give us some examples of that.
Well, NYPD always has several storylines going, and unlike our news television casts, which now tend to wrap everything up and say that's the way the world is, you can wrap things up in a neat package, that program says life continues, and it's muddled, and good and evil are mixed, and the surface is not the truth. There's more to it.
I think another real good example of that is ER, and a really good medical show that deals with life and death issues all the time, almost has to deal with religious matters occasionally, and not from the old-fashioned way with Marcus Welby character that would have a Christian Scientist, watching their son die, and then he would talk them out of their faith and would save their lives. There was always a Christian Scientist who was some evil person on old medical shows. But I think on ER, it's another good example of what you're talking about, of many plot lines, storylines going at once. They're not resolved. And in life and death situations and in that kind of pressure-packed situation, all of the characters, the patients and the doctors, at some point deal with matters of faith, of their own conscience, mortality, and God. I mean.
And what you will find on those shows is there will always be some characters of integrity. And almost always you will find in inexplicable ways, in unpredictable ways, people being hopeful in the midst of despairing situations. Now, as a Christian, I would say that's a basic religious message. And as Christians, we say, well, we have an account for that. That comes from God. The show isn't saying that, but it is raising the religious question implicitly. Why is that true to life? And why does that keep being true? That when death seems to defeat us, new life comes out of it. So I think the secular media can tackle those religious questions and present two different answers. One is, you're in this world to make a career and to get the most you can in material goods. That's a very consistent message. And the other is, consistently, there's more to life than that. And those are deeply religious issues.
Well, you know, as I hear both of you talk about that, it occurs to me there's probably more religion on the non-religious shows from that standpoint.
I think so.
That's what we're saying.
Yeah, I would agree
in terms
with that.
of real wrestling
I would agree with that.
with deep faith issues.
I mean, even on a show that's supposedly as fanciful as The X-Files, the female character Scully, who had cancer one whole season, almost the whole year, she talked about her faith and getting back in touch with her God, and that's, you know, that's on a science fiction show about aliens. So it's like, you know, it's out there. The truth is out there. You just have to look for it. And I think another place that it's showing up more and more these days is on newscasts, not newscasts, but news programs. And the best example I have of that is ABC News is the only network news that has a religion beat reporter, Peggy Waymeyer, and she's from Dallas. But they did a piece on Primetime Live on the McCoy septuplets. And instead of approaching it from the typical way of, here are these 7 babies, these overrun parents, and they're dealing with 1,000 diapers a week or whatever, they had the religion reporter do the piece, and she did it from the standpoint of why these people chose to have these 7 babies when they could have had the reduction technique and had 3 or 4, and why the people from their church are basically raising these kids, or at least taking care of them in the early going. And it was very much a spiritual story as opposed to a 7 babies in chaos kind of story. And it was an unusual approach for a news magazine to take.
Okay.
Probably because the McCoys are so deeply into the religious.
Now you're getting outside of the usual kinds of programming that of stories of like the X-Files or whatever into news, and it makes me aware of the fact that you could, with this broader definition of spirituality that you're talking about, you could see a clear across the spectrum of television. If you had what in media literacy circles is called the awareness of what these issues are, and being able to proactively interact with that rather than just be a couch potato in regard to it, and use it in the church or in your family life or wherever. That's kind of the direction I found myself going as you were talking about this. And I also was thinking about the fact that over the years, looking at it historically, religion on prime time has, like you were mentioning before the show, Diane, about Little House on the Prairie.
And the Waltons.
And the Waltons. They'd say grace around the table and think nothing of it.
It was not something that stood out as being strange for either of those 2 shows, because that was very much a part of who those 2 families were. They were very strong in their faith, and they went to church and they said grace, and there were storylines that went around their lives that weren't necessarily pertaining to faith, but it was very clear that their religious beliefs and their church going was a part of their lives.
I don't usually find a little bit of a difference of opinion between my guests on the show, but I found one just at the end of the first half that I want to come back to before we end the show. Could you do an All in the Family type humorous treatment of these really serious issues that people are concerned about, whether it's abortion or homosexuality or whatever, in an Archie Bunker setting?
A sitcom version of Nothing Sacred. Gosh, I don't know why I have this difference in my head that you can deal with racial stereotypes and homophobia and any number of things where you're sort of pulling up people's prejudices and making fun of them, or people's deeply held beliefs in some case rather than prejudices, and laughing about them. But I think most people would draw the line with abortion, and
I don't think it has to be so.
Okay.
I'm thinking of the Seinfeld episode in which Seinfeld and, is it George, are overhead talking when they're pretending to be homosexual. And then the newspaper reporter becomes convinced that they're homosexual. And so Seinfeld keeps saying, oh no, we're not. Not that there's anything the matter with it. And caught the liberal ambivalence about accepting homosexuality as a lifestyle, and then their deep-seated unwillingness to be identified as homosexual. Now that was humorous dealing with a very sensitive subject. I think on abortion, you probably couldn't make fun of abortion, but you could stereotype the extremist positions in a way that was extremely humorous, and the message would be either one of those positions is inadequate for the reality. And I think you could get, first of all, that's what I would want to argue in the abstract, but I think you could get at that through humor. You could catch the inconsistency of an extreme pro-life position and an extreme, it's only a woman's choice, and just make those laughable.
I'd have to see the script on that.
Well,
See what people believe
I'm
on that.
convinced I couldn't do it. But again, I don't
Maybe
see
Norman
in
Lear could do
principle.
it.
I think
mean,
maybe Norman Lear
someone like him.
or someone like
Yeah.
him could.
Okay.
Do you know what the most often broken commandment is on primetime television?
But
Infidelity. Infidelity is the most consistently portrayed sin on television.
No,
More
it's not,
so than killing.
well,
Is
it's
that
not portrayed
especially
as
on-
a sin.
Right, well, but it's...
No, so it's not broken, it's embraced.
Okay.
No, that's what I meant about the religious message of the media. The religious message of many of our sitcom shows is that if you're in your 30s, your whole life revolves around sex.
I see.
False God.
Well, and we haven't even touched afternoon soap operas, but maybe that'll be our next show. We haven't talked about televangelists. I mean, that's religion on the tube, and so wouldn't you say we've got more to talk about
There's
it
more, there's more.
a later time?
Stay
Sure is.
tuned.
But you folks have been great today to get us going on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane,
It's
Durston.
been good to be here.
And we thank you folks for looking in. Next week on Austin Faith Dialogue, we'll be back again, and looking forward to seeing you then. I'm Richard Thompson for Austin Metropolitan Ministry, and peace be with you all.